The plane had barely taken off when the trouble started. The hum of the engines droned beneath the murmurs of passengers settling in, but all of it was soon overshadowed by a shrill, condescending voice. "Excuse me." "Yes, you, flight attendant. This seat is disgusting. Do you expect me to sit in filth for the next 6 hours?" Claire Parker turned her head slightly, already regretting her decision to book a red-eye flight. The woman 2 rows ahead was in full tantrum mode, jabbing a manicured finger at the seat cushion, her voice cutting through the cabin like a knife. The flight attendant, a petite woman with weary eyes, forced a patient smile. "I'm very sorry, ma'am. Let me find you another seat." "You better." The woman snapped, tossing her designer purse onto the aisle seat beside her. "This airline is a joke." Claire exhaled sharply. Some people just live to make others miserable. She turned her gaze back to the window, watching the twinkling lights of the city fade beneath them. The hours stretched on, but the woman whom Claire mentally nicknamed Miss Entitlement continued her reign of terror. She complained about the food, berated the attendant for not refilling her drink fast enough, and even snapped at the man seated beside her when he asked to use the restroom. Then something strange happened. It started subtly. The plane shuddered, a slight turbulence rocking the cabin. Nothing unusual, until the lights flickered. A hushed murmur spread among the passengers. A deep, guttural groan filled the air. Not from the engines. Not from the passengers. It sounded like something shifting within the plane itself. The kind of sound that didn't belong at 30,000 feet. Claire sat upright. A cold prickle ran down her spine. Miss Entitlement, however, remained oblivious. She had just resumed another rant, this time about how long it was taking to land. Then in an instant she was gone. One blink. That was all it took. One moment she was mid-sentence, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The next, her seat was empty. No sound. No struggle. Nothing but the faint rustling of the seatbelt swaying slightly, as if someone had just been sitting there. A stunned silence filled the cabin. The flight attendant, the same woman Miss Entitlement had been berating all night, stood frozen in the aisle. Her tray of drinks trembled in her hands. Where did she go?" The man who had been sitting beside her stammered. His face had gone pale. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the cabin, half expecting to see the woman storming toward the cockpit in another tantrum. But she was nowhere. Passengers began whispering, looking around as if the woman might reappear. But there was no sign of her. The flight attendant set down her tray and moved cautiously toward the empty seat. She hesitated before reaching down to touch the seatbelt. A cold chill swept over Claire as she saw the attendant's fingers recoil the moment they brushed the fabric. Like it had burned her. A baby started wailing from the back of the plane. Someone muttered a prayer under their breath. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, eerily calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing slight turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." That was it. No mention of the missing woman. No announcement of an emergency. Just business as usual. Claire turned to the man beside her. Did you see what happened?" His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. "She was there. Then she wasn't." His voice wavered. "People don't just disappear." The flight attendant turned, her expression unreadable. "Please stay in your seats. We'll handle it." "Handle it?" Claire's stomach churned. Something was very, very wrong. The plane was still mid-air. There was nowhere for the woman to have gone. And yet, she was gone. Claire's heart pounded as she reached for her phone. Maybe if she took a picture, documented this somehow. The moment she raised the screen, it went black. Dead. She wasn't the only one. Around her, passengers murmured in confusion, shaking their unresponsive devices. The overhead lights flickered again. The groaning sound returned, closer this time, almost like breathing. Then, from the overhead speakers, a sound crackled through. Not the captain's voice this time. It was a whisper. Low. Raspy. "She's not gone. She's here." A wave of cold swept through the cabin. The lights cut out completely, plunging them into darkness. Someone screamed. Claire barely had time to react before she felt it, something cold brushing against her arm. Fingers. She turned sharply, nothing. But she swore she could still feel them. The whispering returned, no longer from the speakers. It was around them. Beside them. Beneath them. The flight attendant stumbled backward, her face pale with terror. "Please," she started, but her voice broke. Claire's breath came in shallow gasps. The seat where the woman had sat, the one that had been empty just moments ago. It wasn't empty anymore. A shape sat there. A dark outline. Motionless. Claire's throat went dry. The lights flickered again, just long enough for her to see it. Miss Entitlement's face. But it wasn't her anymore. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Her eyes were empty, black voids. Her lips parted and a voice, warped and wrong, whispered, "You should have been nicer." The lights cut out again. And this time more than one passenger screamed. The cabin plunged into chaos. Claire's breath hitched as the darkness swallowed everything. The overhead lights flickered violently, like the plane itself was struggling to stay alive. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the aisle, shifting like living things. Someone screamed, raw and desperate. Then the lights sputtered back to life. The woman, Miss Entitlement, was gone again. The seat was empty. Completely vacant, as if she had never been there at all. Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. She turned to the flight attendant, whose hands trembled as she clutched the drink tray. "Did you see that?" Claire's voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the panic murmurs spreading through the cabin. The flight attendant swallowed hard but said nothing. The passengers weren't taking this well. The man who had been sitting next to the missing woman bolted from his seat, frantically looking up and down the aisle. "Where did she go? Someone tell me what's happening." No one answered. The plane's engines rumbled beneath them, but something was different. The usual hum had an underlying distortion, like a frequency just slightly off. Then Claire noticed it. The seats. Rows ahead, where Miss Entitlement had been sitting, the fabric looked wrong. The material pulsed slightly, the seams stretching and shifting as if something beneath the cushion was breathing. No, not something. Someone. Claire's stomach twisted into knots. She tried to shake off the idea, it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But then, the seat sighed. Claire shot out of her chair. "Did you hear that?" The man beside her, Jason, she learned from a brief exchange earlier, looked at her, face pale. "You heard it too?" Before she could answer, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing an anomalous event. Please remain seated." His voice was shaking. Then the speakers let out a static-laced screech. And the whispering returned. "She's still here." It slithered from every direction. From beneath the seats. From overhead. From inside the walls. Claire clamped her hands over her ears. A sharp thud reverberated through the cabin. Then another. Like footsteps. But not on the floor. They were above them. Something was moving across the overhead compartments. Slow, deliberate. The plastic casing trembled as if under immense weight. Jason cursed under his breath. A woman a few rows ahead started crying softly. Then, the overhead compartment buckled. A shape pressed against it from the inside. Fingers, stretching at the plastic, nails scraping. Something was crawling inside the compartments. The flight attendant stumbled backward, knocking over the drink cart. We need to stay calm," she stammered, voice breaking. No one was calm. The thing inside the compartment moved. Claire could hear it dragging itself across, heading toward the back of the plane. And then, it laughed. A slow, distorted giggle. Like a child's toy running out of batteries. Then boom. The compartment door snapped open. Something fell out. A lump of flesh, tangled in long strands of dark hair. A head. Claire barely had time to process it before she realized. The face was familiar. It was Miss Entitlement. Her lips were frozen in that same unnatural grin. Her eyes, deep endless pits of black, were locked onto Claire. Her mouth opened, stretching impossibly wide. And then she spoke. "It's rude to ignore me." Claire screamed. The cabin lights burst, plunging them back into darkness. The plane shuddered violently, tossing passengers against their seats. Claire braced herself, gripping the armrests as an unnatural force seemed to pull the plane downward. Someone else screamed, this time in agony. The darkness shifted. Shadows curled around the walls, slithering like living things. The whispering returned, but this time it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Dozens. Hundreds. Claire could hear them breathing. Pressing closer. Their voices like wind through hollow bones. Then she felt it. Cold, skeletal fingers brushing her ankle from beneath the seat. She kicked wildly, her pulse hammering. "There's something under the seats." Jason barely had time to react before the flight attendant screamed. One of the passengers, a man in his 40s sitting near the back, was gone. His seatbelt still buckled. His drink still on the tray. But he was missing. Claire's blood ran cold. Then she saw it. The carpet of the aisle was moving. Bulging and shifting like something was crawling just beneath the surface. Jason grabbed her arm. "We have to get to the front of the plane." She hesitated, glancing toward the cockpit. But before she could respond, the whispering stopped. Complete silence. Then a slow, dragging sound. Claire turned her head and froze. Standing in the aisle mere feet away was Miss Entitlement. Except, it wasn't her. Her limbs were elongated, joints bending the wrong way. Her neck tilted unnaturally, her head lolling to one side. Her grin had stretched even wider now, the corners of her lips splitting open like torn fabric. And in her black, hollow eyes, Claire saw something move. Something inside her. Something waiting. Miss Entitlement lifted one decayed hand and pointed at Claire. "You should have been nicer." Then she lunged. The plane shook violently. Passengers screamed. The lights exploded in a shower of sparks. And then, the emergency oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. Only, they weren't oxygen masks anymore. They were mouths. Each mask twisted and gnashed, filled with jagged, rotting teeth. And they were all laughing. Claire barely had time to move before the masks lunged for the passengers. Jason grabbed her wrist. "Run!" Claire didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the cockpit as the plane descended into absolute madness. Claire ran. The cabin behind her erupted into chaos. Screams, the tearing of fabric, the grotesque laughter of those things. The oxygen masks still dangled from the ceiling, but they were no longer masks. They were mouths, snapping wildly, their blackened gums writhing as they bit into the air, searching for flesh. She dodged past a man who was clawing at his face, trying to rip away one of the masks that had latched onto his skin. His screams were muffled, swallowed by the thing as it forced itself inside his mouth. Claire didn't look back. Jason was right behind her, his breaths ragged, his footsteps barely audible over the chaos. The flight attendant, what was her name, was ahead, fumbling with the cockpit door. She banged on it frantically. "Captain! Open up!" No response. Claire reached her, panting. "Try the access code." The flight attendant, Emily, Claire remembered now, shook her head. I don't know it." Her eyes were wild with terror. Claire turned to Jason. "Help me break it down." But before they could react, a horrible gurgling sound erupted from behind them. Claire spun around. The passengers were no longer just screaming. They were changing. The ones who had been caught by the masks, by the things, were convulsing, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. Bones snapped, stretching their limbs into grotesque shapes. Their mouths gaped open, but their eyes were the worst part. Black. Hollow. Consuming. And they were laughing. Miss Entitlement stood in the middle of them, watching. Her elongated fingers twitched. Her grotesque, split-wide grin stretched even further, her jagged teeth glinting under the dim, flickering cabin lights. She took a step forward. Claire took a step back. Miss Entitlement tilted her head. "You can't leave," she whispered. Claire grabbed Emily's wrist. "We have to get inside the cockpit. Now." Jason pounded on the door. "Open up." Still nothing. Behind them, the possessed passengers twitched and jerked toward them, their movements unnatural, like broken puppets being forced forward. Then, Miss Entitlement raised her hand. The overhead lights burst into darkness. The plane lurched. Claire screamed as the floor seemed to tilt, sending her tumbling into the cockpit door. Jason caught her before she hit the ground, but Emily wasn't as lucky. She went sprawling into the aisle. Straight toward the things. Emily let out a sob as she scrambled backward. The nearest creature, a woman who had once been an elderly passenger, twitched as her head snapped toward Emily. And then she lunged. Claire barely had time to react before Jason grabbed the intercom phone from the wall and slammed it into the creature's skull. The thing shrieked, a sound that wasn't human, that wasn't even of this world, and collapsed backward, writhing. Jason grabbed Emily by the arm, pulling her up. "Move." Then, without hesitation, he grabbed the cockpit door handle and threw his full weight against it. Crack! The door burst open. The three of them stumbled inside. Claire turned and slammed the door shut just as the horde of laughing, twitching passengers reached them. Fists pounded against the door. Nails scraped against the metal. Claire locked the door. Then, silence. She turned, her heart hammering. The cockpit was empty. The captain and co-pilot were gone. The plane was flying itself. The control panels flickered erratically, the altimeter spinning wildly, the navigation screen displaying nothing but static. Emily staggered forward. Where are they?" Jason moved toward the captain's seat, reaching for the controls. The radio crackled. All three of them froze. Static hissed through the cockpit speakers. Then, a voice. "Help us." Jason's hands hovered over the radio. "Who is this?" More static. Then, a horrible sound. A deep, wet gurgling. Like something choking on its own blood. Then the voice changed. Not pleading. Not weak. Something else. Something wrong. "It's too late." The speakers exploded with laughter. The same twisted, childlike giggle they had heard before. The same voice as Miss Entitlement. The cockpit shook violently. The controls sparked. The altimeter spun out of control. Then, the emergency override panel on the captain's console lit up. Jason pointed at it. "That's the autopilot override. If we can turn it off, we might be able to control the plane." Claire's hands were shaking. What if? She swallowed. What if that's what they want? Emily turned toward her, face pale. "What do you mean?" Before Claire could answer, a sound echoed through the cockpit. A slow, deliberate knock. From inside the overhead compartments. They all looked up. The panel bulged. Something inside the cockpit compartments shifted. Another knock. And then, a voice. From directly above them. "I said you can't leave." The panel snapped open. And something fell out. It hit the ground with a sickening thud. Claire screamed. It was one of the pilots. His body was twisted, his face frozen in horror. His chest, hollowed out. Like something had crawled inside him. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. Then, his head twitched. And he looked at her. His lips didn't move, but the voice that came from him was not his own. It was hers. Miss Entitlement's. "You should have been nicer." The lights burst. The cockpit filled with darkness. And something moved. Something inside the walls. Something that had been waiting for them. Darkness swallowed the cockpit. Claire's breath hitched as the temperature plummeted, a bone-deep chill creeping into her limbs. The only light came from the shattered control panels, flickering like dying embers. The plane lurched, sending her stumbling against the cold metal walls. Something moved in the darkness. Not just one thing. Many. Jason grabbed Claire's wrist, his grip ice cold. "We have to get out of here," he whispered, barely audible over the growing hum of static that now filled the cockpit. Emily stood frozen, her eyes locked on the lifeless thing that had once been the pilot. His body lay in a crumpled heap, his mouth slack, his ribs unnaturally contorted outward, as if something had clawed its way out from inside him. Then, his head snapped toward them. His jaw stretched wide, far too wide. A sickening crack echoed through the cockpit as his lips curled into a grotesque grin. And then her voice came from his throat. "You should have been nicer." The pilot's body lunged. Claire screamed, diving out of the way as the corpse's stiff fingers snatched at the air where her throat had just been. Jason grabbed the emergency flashlight from the side panel and swung it hard, smashing it against the pilot's skull. The impact sent the body staggering back, but it didn't fall. It merely twisted its neck unnaturally to face them again. And laughed. Low at first, then higher, manic, distorted. It echoed from every speaker, from the walls, from the very air inside the cockpit. Then the entire plane tilted forward. Claire hit the floor hard as gravity yanked her toward the door. Jason and Emily slid against the wall, barely catching themselves as the plane plunged. The altimeter screamed, a shrill warning tone that only made the panic worse. "We're losing altitude," Jason shouted, clawing his way toward the controls. Emily scrambled beside him. "The autopilot, turn it off." Jason's fingers danced across the flickering control panel, searching for the override. His breath was ragged, his hands slick with sweat. Claire could barely hear anything over the roaring of wind outside the cockpit, over the whispers now rising all around them. Then, a hand grabbed her ankle. Claire's stomach dropped. She looked down. The floor beneath her had changed. It wasn't metal anymore. It was skin. Pale, writhing flesh. And fingers, hundreds of them, were pushing through the floor, reaching for her. She choked on a scream, kicking wildly. The fingers twitched and gripped tighter. The more she struggled, the more the floor pulled her down. Jason noticed. "Claire!" He dove toward her, grabbing her arms and yanking her back just as the hands ripped at her legs, leaving behind deep, stinging welts. The whispers screamed. The cockpit shuddered. Jason slammed his fist onto the autopilot override button. A sharp click. Then, silence. For a brief moment, the static, the whispers, the laughter, all of it vanished. The plane leveled out. Claire gasped, her lungs burning. The floor beneath her was metal again. Normal. As if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something was still here. Jason panted, his hands gripping the edges of the control panel. Emily sat against the wall, staring blankly at the lifeless pilot's body, her breath shaky. Then Claire felt it. The air. It was wrong. Too still. Too expectant. She turned, slowly, toward the cockpit door. The glass window was fogging up. From the other side. A single word appeared in the condensation, traced by an invisible hand. "Look." Claire's heart thundered. Emily followed her gaze and screamed. Claire turned just in time to see. The passengers. They were standing in the aisle. All of them. Perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Waiting. And Miss Entitlement stood among them. Her head tilted. Her black, hollow eyes locked onto Claire's. Then, slowly, she raised her hand. Pointed at the cockpit. And whispered. "You were never flying this plane." The cabin lights burst. The plane shook violently. And the door behind them exploded open. The darkness rushed in. It swallowed them whole. And suddenly, Claire was falling. Plunging into nothingness. The screams of Jason and Emily faded. The sound of the plane vanished. There was only cold. Only black. And in that vast emptiness, a single voice echoed, whispering against her ear. "Now it's your turn." Then, silence. Claire was falling. A weightless, terrifying plunge into utter blackness. The howling wind had vanished. The plane was gone. Jason and Emily were nowhere. Only darkness. And then, a sudden stop. Not a crash. Not an impact. Just nothing. She was suspended, as though something unseen had caught her mid-air. The silence was suffocating. Then Claire opened her eyes. She was no longer in the cockpit. No longer on the plane. She stood in the middle of a vast, empty terminal. The airport was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that comes when a place is too empty, like it had been abandoned for centuries. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows on the tiled floor. Rows of seats stretched endlessly in all directions, some overturned, others with luggage still sitting beside them as if their owners had just vanished. The departure board above her head clicked and changed, but instead of displaying flight information it bled. Dripping letters. No escape. Claire took a step back, her shoes echoing far too loudly. Something about this place felt wrong. It felt like the in-between. Like a place stuck between one world and the next. A shiver ran down her spine. She wasn't alone. Somewhere beyond the flickering lights, beyond the endless rows of seats, she heard it. Laughter. High-pitched, unnatural. Miss Entitlement's laughter. Claire spun around. And there she was. Standing at the far end of the terminal, her unervingly thin frame backlit by the flickering lights. That same twisted grin. Those black, hollow eyes. Claire's pulse pounded in her ears. Miss Entitlement took a step forward. Claire ran. She didn't care where. She just knew she had to get away. She sprinted past empty gates, past luggage carousels that weren't moving, past security checkpoints where the X-ray machines displayed nothing but static. Then, a voice. Claire. She skidded to a stop. Jason. She turned sharply, scanning the area. And there, through a shattered glass window, stood Jason and Emily. Their faces were pale, desperate, their hands pressed against the glass. Claire, you have to get out of here. Jason yelled. Emily's eyes were wide with terror. It's not real. None of this is real. Claire took a step toward them. And something cold curled around her wrist. She gasped, looking down. A hand. Miss Entitlement's fingers were wrapped around her wrist. Her jagged nails dug into Claire's skin. Claire's breath hitched. She looked up. And Miss Entitlement was right there. Her face was inches from Claire's, her grin even wider now, stretching inhumanly across her face. You never left that plane, she whispered. Claire froze. The airport around her flickered. The lights distorted. For a fraction of a second, she wasn't in the terminal anymore. She was back on the plane. But it was wrong. The walls were pulsing, alive. The seats were filled with shadows, not passengers but figures with empty faces. The plane wasn't flying. It was suspended in endless black. Floating. Dead. Miss Entitlement leaned in, her breath ice-cold against Claire's ear. You were never meant to land. Claire screamed. She ripped her wrist free and bolted toward Jason and Emily. The glass window between them had cracks spider-webbing across it, as if reality itself was breaking. Jason pounded on the glass. Claire, wake up. Emily reached for her. It's the only way out. Claire didn't understand. Wake up. Then she saw it. The reflection in the glass. Her own face. But it wasn't her. The Claire in the reflection wasn't terrified. She was grinning. Her eyes were black. She whispered. You should have been nicer. Crash. The glass shattered. Everything imploded. A blinding white light ripped through the darkness. And then... Gasp. Claire's eyes flew open. She was in a hospital bed. Her throat burned. Her lungs ached. Every inch of her body felt like it had been torn apart and put back together. Machines beeped softly around her. A nurse gasped. Oh my God, she's awake. Claire tried to speak, but her voice was raw. Jason burst into the room. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, but when he saw her, relief flooded his features. Claire. Emily followed, tears streaming down her face. You were in a coma for 2 weeks. Claire's heart pounded. To the plane. Jason's expression darkened. He swallowed hard. Claire, the plane crashed. Claire's blood ran cold. No survivors. Except you. She couldn't breathe. She tried to remember. The flight. The passengers. The cockpit. The laughter. Miss Entitlement. The black eyes. The whispers. The glass shattering. Jason took her hand gently. They found you in the wreckage. But the weird thing is. Claire looked at him, her pulse hammering. What? Jason hesitated. They found you still buckled into your seat. Like the plane never moved. Emily nodded, voice shaking. And you kept saying something in your sleep. Claire's mouth was dry. What? Jason exchanged a look with Emily before whispering. You should have been nicer. The room plunged into silence. Claire's breath hitched. Her hands trembled. Then, the hospital intercom crackled to life. A distorted, static-filled giggle echoed through the speakers. A familiar, twisted voice. You were never meant to land. The lights flickered. Claire's heart stopped. And somewhere just outside the hospital room, laughter. Low. Soft. Waiting.